and thank you so much for joining us for Q&A.
Pleasure.
The origins of the film really go back to K.W. Lee, and both of you have known for quite a long time, but I understand that he was in many ways a mentor to you and told you about the case of Chol Soo Lee.
Yeah, actually, I met him when I was 18 years old, and he is the one who inspired me to want to become a journalist in the first place. If you meet him yourself, you'd be inspired as well. But yeah, we've both known about the Chol Soo Lee case actually for quite some time, as you said. But it wasn't really until the funeral of Chol Soo Lee where I feel like the seeds were planted to make a film. And I had attended the funeral to actually write an obituary about Chol Soo Lee for a Korean American magazine I worked for at the time. And also to check on KW. As you saw in the film, KW became quite close to Chol Soo Lee, even after his release, and he was a somewhat of a father figure to him. And so he was really in great pain when Chol Soo Lee died. He had never expected to outlive him. And so I went to the funeral, and there weren't that many people there. And I was struck by that because, here Chol Soo Lee had sort of attracted, dozens or sometimes hundreds of people at protests on his behalf. And then there were probably less than 50 people at this service. And those present were included many of the activists who had come to Chol Soo's aid decades earlier, and also KW. And I think I was just struck by the emotion in the room. It was something that I describe as beyond grieving for someone that they had lost. There was a heaviness. And KW Lee at one point, when he was clutching this Buddhist monk's walking stick that Chol Soo had carved for him, he was quite emotional, and he said, why is this story underground after all these years? And he was talking about how this landmark Asian American social justice movement, the first of its kind really, had sort of been forgotten and not even something that you was taught in Asian American studies classes in American universities and colleges. And he was lamenting that. And so fast forward about 9 months later, Eugene and I, who had worked together as journalists, wanted to collaborate on a film project. And I mentioned the heaviness, and which had stayed with me. And we have always shared a passion for telling complicated stories about Asian Americans, centering Asian Americans with nuance and depth. And we just knew we had to dive into this story, that it was just too important and too consequential to allow to stay buried in history. And in a way, it was our generational responsibility.
Eugene, there's incredible archival material in this film that I'm sure I have never seen before. Probably the audience hasn't either. And how you found that, I think, is significant, that so much of it came from your sources, from the people you were interviewing, as opposed to, say, I don't know, a university library or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And we can't thank KW Lee for opening up so many of the doors to people who were involved with the case, to sort of help establish that connection for them to trust us with what they'd kept. Because as you mentioned, so many of them had hung on to materials over the years. I mean, we've come to call it kind of not just a community archive, but an underground archive even, of material related to Chol Soo Lee that, as you said, was not in a traditional place. And it speaks to the importance of community in recognizing its own stories and playing a role in preserving its own histories. Because if it were not for what these, mostly Asian American activists, journalists, filmmakers had done, if it was not for this archive that they'd put together, if they had not taken it upon themselves to create this, we wouldn't have a film today. And it's really just been such an honor to extend on what they started and what they built to be able to do that. Also just want to give a quick shout out to our archival producer, who we did eventually bring on, because we needed to really kind of build out this world to make the film be as immersive from an archival perspective as we wanted it to be. So Brian Becker came on as an archival producer and just found just some amazing gems that were really just, otherwise would have stayed, uncovered in so many of these archives, including that commercial for KW Lee that we just, I mean, we wanted to play the whole thing.
That's not the whole thing.
It's not. There's more, which we both could probably recite from memory. But I mean, it's just incredible. I mean, to imagine a Korean immigrant at a mainstream daily newspaper being like the Woodward, the Bernstein, the star that is being used to sell subscriptions. I mean, that's the power of archival footage. You don't have to imagine it. You can just sort of like hear it and feel it and know that it had happened.
Yeah, and we see, and that underscores how important representation and diversity is in newsrooms. For one thing, that without him, what would have happened to, in this case? It's frightening to imagine. And Julie, you touched on this a bit, but this really was perhaps the first movement of its kind that was pan-Asian American, and that's a really, really important part of your film, I think, to see that coalition coming together in such an unusual way. And just like KW's work, without that, what would have happened in this case?
Exactly. And I think what made it unusual is really the first time Korean immigrants united with these third generation Asian American young people. And it's quite remarkable because many of these Korean immigrants, they were staunchly anti-communist in their politics, church-going grandmothers you saw even. And here they are standing alongside third-generation Asian American radicals who self-identified as communists. So that wasn't an easy alliance, honestly. We didn't have a chance to, in the film, I think, explore all the ins and outs of how difficult that was. But really, I mean, when you think about that, that is a highly unusual coming together of very different groups. But you are inspired by it too, that it can happen, that groups with their differences, even political ones, can actually cross those bridges and work together. And, overturning 2 murder convictions in the American criminal justice system, that's pretty remarkable.
Yeah, that's extraordinary. Eugene, have you ever given any thought to, if you could have interviewed Chol Soo, of what you would like to have asked him, or perhaps his mother?
Oh, I mean, there's so many questions that could come to mind, and I think, but I think one thing that we benefited from was really the wealth of written material that was left behind, the biography that was published, certainly of his prison memoirs, but many sort of letters and longer handwritten biographies as well as a lot of these intimate phone calls that KW Lee had recorded between the two of them. And we sort of spoke of this often while we were working on the film. It was always about trying to let Chol Soo Lee tell his story, like in his own words, with his own voice. And so through that, we hope to really have been able to channel a lot and answer a lot of what we hope to have asked him. And hopefully we'll get a chance to talk about this as well. But we also were fortunate enough to collaborate with a remarkable young man named Sebastian Yoon to voice Chol Soo as well.
I was going to ask that next, because there's a rather remarkable story about your narrator. What a lot of directors might have turned to, say, a well-known actor or something like that, but this audience may not be familiar with Sebastian Yoon. But tell me how you connected with him and why you wanted him as your narrator.
Yes, we love talking about Sebastian. He's the discovery of our brilliant producer, Soo Kim, who saw him speaking at an event for another documentary called College Behind Bars. And he was one of the people featured in that series, which talked about a program that allows incarcerated men and women to take college courses and earn their degrees from prison. And she was, first of all, shocked to see a Korean American representing that film. He was released from prison in 2019. And she said she just felt there was something about him. He was very honest and open, and there was almost an innate friendliness that she felt like that reminded her of Chol Soo Lee. I think there was also vulnerability. And she just almost, I think by some kind of instinct, thought he could be the voice of Chol Soo Lee. So she told us about him. We watched the series ourselves and were equally blown away by him. And we reached out. And fortunately, well, first he was very surprised to find out there was an Asian American filmmaking team making a film about a formerly incarcerated Korean American, and he was game to work with us. So we were very fortunate that way. And you know, I think it's important to point out that he not only actually did an incredible job with the narration, but he collaborated with Eugene and me on the script for what Chol Soo says in the film. And so he was really able to emphasize to us that it wasn't just prison violence that Chol Soo confronted, but how do we get at the internal struggle he went through of incarceration. So the dehumanization, the isolation, the depression that you have to face every day. And really Sebastian helped us actually create new scenes to bring that out. And it was just an amazing collaboration. And I think you could tell just even by his voice, that lived experience that he brings to voicing Chol Soo Lee. And you know, I want to point out too, it was very hard for Sebastian to revisit trauma because he was only released, as I said, in 2019. And we recorded this with him in 2021. But he told us that he actually felt a connection to Chol Soo Lee, his story. He also felt that he had an obligation to Chol Soo Lee, who's no longer with us, to try to stand up for him and make sure that when audiences saw the film, they wouldn't be so quick to judge him about like, why did you know, like people might say, why did you mess up? Why couldn't you fulfill, you know, give back to the community and just live a straight life? He wanted people to see how difficult it was for him and maybe just to extend some empathy. I'll add this too, you know, you mentioned earlier how, you know, what questions would we want to ask Chol Soo Lee? I think one thing, you know, I asked myself a lot, and I imagine Eugene did too, was just, I would just be like, Chol Soo, what do you want people to know about you? What do you want people to know about your life? And in many ways, with Eugene, I felt very insecure for many years before Sebastian came on, because as much as we immersed ourselves in everything Chol Soo left behind, we felt like we weren't getting close enough to the core of him. And after Sebastian joined our project and worked with us, I have to say, like, it felt like everything fell into place. And so in some ways I say, hey, like maybe Sebastian and other members of our team made sort of a spiritual connection to him. And that's what I truly believe.
And Eugene, what do you think are the lessons of the film for today? Because, you know, from my perspective, there are important ones, I think particularly in light of, you know, especially during the height of the pandemic, of anti-Asian American hate crimes. It's really a time for solidarity, and that your film, of course, speaks to that. But from your point of view, what do you think we should be reflecting on for us today?
I mean, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I think it connects in a couple of ways. I mean, to sort of be able to connect this moment to this history, I mean, it demonstrates that racism against Asian Americans is nothing new, and there is a deep history of that. The solidarity piece is, I think, important, as you mentioned. You know, as Julie mentioned, you know, it was very unlikely for people to work together in this way. I mean, the term Asian American had just been coined not long before, like the events depicted here. And this was a demonstration of what could happen when you reach out to people who you might not necessarily think that you can work together with. And so, you know, to extend that out to this broader moment, I think it's important to try and find those places where you can find those unlikely solidarities, which are just so key to any kind of movement work, any kind of activist work. And I think the film just always moves me when I think about how difficult those connections must have been to maintain, and just gives me a lot of food for thought for how to sort of move forward today.
I think we have time for maybe a couple of questions, if there are audience questions. While you're, oh, I see one in back. Yes.
Kudos on a very powerful and emotional film. Thank you. I wondered if I happen to know one of the too few people who got actually the apology and financial remuneration for sitting in prison way too long for a crime somebody didn't and I'm wondering, I kept thinking, did they try to get that, and it probably was way too early for progressive ideas that somebody should be compensated, but was there any effort? Because while no money will help with the pain of what he's gone through, it's easier if you have resources.
Good question.
No, he did not get any compensation. He did talk about suing the the state, but they did not pursue it. As you can imagine, again, overturning 2 murder convictions in the criminal justice system, all the money they had to raise for these defense attorneys. They overturned the first murder conviction in a habeas corpus. If anybody who's familiar with the legal workings of our system know that that's like nearly impossible to do, and then to then win at the retrial. So there was so much lawyering that had to be done, and a lot of money in fundraising toward that. No, there was no effort like that. And I want to add too, like the police department, San Francisco Police Department, and also the DA never admitted wrongdoing. And I think that was a source of deep ache for Chol Soo Lee after his release. We did think about interviewing actually the DA and the police inspector who's in our film for the film. I ended up calling them just off camera to talk to them just to see if they had changed their minds after 40 years. Interestingly, the DA had not, but Detective Frank Falzone, I cold called him one day and he actually said to me, I was just thinking about Chol Soo Lee. And he said, that is the one case in my 20 plus years as a homicide detective where I wonder, did he really do it? And I have serious doubts now. And so he said that he didn't think that, back when it happened, and he wasn't trying to railroad him, but he said now he has serious doubts. So, I actually told him, like, can I tell people that, do you mind if I share that information? Because I think it would have given Chol Soo's tremendous sense of peace, actually, just to get that admission. And then he agreed, yeah.
Well, another question? Yes.
So in the middle part of the movie, you mentioned the movie adaptation, the True Believer. Yeah. So, like in general, when we look at like a narrative feature, that should be like a triumph moment. But then in your documentary, like after it got released, it's like entering into an even darker path. So I was wondering, is that the decision? Is that the idea you have from the beginning when you're making this documentary? And my second question is like, is that murder case ever been solved? The Chinatown murder. Thank you.
So from the beginning, we always knew we wanted to do the full story because so much of that has to do of what happened after he was released, perhaps has to do with why the case is not better known, like sort of to speak to kind of what KW's pain was at the funeral. And, excuse me, and, Chol Soo himself would speak about this sometimes, wondering whether it was because his case was messier, that it was less well known than, other moments in history, like the Vincent Chin case, for example, which is far better known than this particular case. But, inherent in that is sort of this question of what we expect of our heroes, right? Like, does a person have to be perfect to deserve justice? And does a person have to have been perfect to be remembered? And I think in terms of how we approached the film, we wanted to make sure that we were able to tell Chol Soo's whole story, show everything that he'd gone through, so that you can really see like his resilience and his fight. And so when you sort of think about that in the context of the movement and how it's less well remembered, to try and take that out of this thing where it's like, okay, the movement was great, but it didn't work out, and that's why, to take it away from that and to really just sort of reframe it so that we can celebrate Chol Soo's resilience and just how much he'd been through and how much he fought, while celebrating this incredible, indelible moment in history, this moment of resistance that just deserves to be remembered. I mean, that was always sort of there in the film, and thankfully from what we've seen is that that's how audiences have been responding to the story as well, which has just filled us with tremendous gratitude.
In terms of the real killer, well, the police department and the DA never admitted wrongdoing at that time, or that Chol Soo wasn't the rightful killer. So they never pursued leads for the real killer. But what's crazy is that people in Chinatown at the time, they knew who the real killer was. And in fact, he had a nickname after the killing, which was Killer. And so, but the police never pursued that lead. So yeah, but what was crazy is the story we've heard is that this young man, who, by the way, was closer to the height that the eyewitnesses originally identified, he was probably like around 5'9", 5'10", Chinese. He apparently might have become a lawyer, like fled to Hawaii, might have become a lawyer.
And obviously never confessed. Well, I want to thank you both for an incredible film, but before we go, can you tell people where other audiences can experience the film going forward?
Sure. We're incredibly honored to be part of this screening series, and it will be available to stream as part of the IDA streaming series. It is also streaming now on Mubi, M-U-B-I, the streaming service as well. So please tell folks that they can catch it streaming there. And we have a PBS broadcast date as well that's coming. That's going to be in the coming year. We're going to be on Independent Lens, and we're just extremely excited about that because the reach of PBS is amazing, but also one of our goals from early on was to make sure that our film was available to watch in prisons as well. And PBS is one of the networks that is available for incarcerated people. So we're very excited about all of that. So please spread the word.
Thank you both to Julie Ha and Eugene Yi, the directors of Free Chol Soo Lee.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you, Matt.